Hi, I'm Jared with the Mount St. Helens Institute, and I'm your host for tonight's Views and Brews. We're a nonprofit partner of the Forest Service, and our mission is to advance understanding of the Earth through science, education, and exploration of volcanic landscapes. Some of the ways we're doing that is with live virtual field trips to Mount St. Helens. Our education team is leading private trips for families and pods, and of course, there's virtual Views and Brews, as well as many other programs. If you'd like to make a donation to keep these programs going, you can visit our website by following the link posted in this event. The Mount St. Helens Institute is a proud partner of the Cowlitz tribe, and we encourage you, wherever you are, to learn about the indigenous cultures where you live. We operate on the land of the Cowlitz tribes and the confederated bands and tribes of the Yakima Nation. If you have questions during the event tonight, please feel free to ask them in the chat feed, and we'll get to as many as we can. Our presenters tonight are Mount Rainier National Park ecologist, Dr. Tara Chestnut, and UW graduate student in the School of the Environment and Forestry Sciences, Kayla Dreher. Ladies, thanks for being here tonight.
Hello, thanks so much for having us.
Hi, thank you. And so I'll just give a brief introduction about myself and about Kayla and how we came to give this presentation. We definitely thank Jared and Ray Yerkowitz for the invitation, and we're really excited to talk to you about some of the carnivore work that we have been doing at Mount Rainier National Park. Much of it has been led by Kayla and also one of our project partners, Jocelyn Akins at the Cascade Carnivore Project. And I will turn the presentation over to Kayla, and we'll be monitoring the chat in the Facebook live feed so we can answer questions as they come through.
Yeah, thank you so much everyone for joining in to hear about carnivores in Mount Rainier. My name is Kayla Dreher. I'm a graduate student at the University of Washington in the Peru Community Ecology Lab. I'm also a former Mount Rainier seasonal wildlife technician. I went to the University of Iowa where I studied sociology and environmental science. But after moving to Washington State and getting too exposed to conservation work involving some of the species we'll be talking about tonight, I became really excited and passionate about Washington's carnivores. So I'm excited to share some of that with you tonight. So I guess I will start sharing my screen and jump into it. Okay. All right, so in this presentation, I'm going to share a little about the ongoing research projects of 3 carnivore species in and around Mount Rainier and throughout the Washington Cascades. And so these species are the Cascade red fox, which is a subspecies of red fox only found in the Washington Cascades. The fisher, which is currently being reintroduced to the Cascades following a long absence, and the wolverine, which was trapped and poisoned to local extinction in Washington during the 1900s, but is now naturally recolonizing the Cascades from Canada. And in order to protect and preserve these rare carnivores, we need a lot more information on them. And so the research and findings that I'll be sharing on really extends beyond the boundary of Mount Rainier and is a product of collaborations with many partners like universities, nonprofits, federal and state agencies, researchers, and volunteers. So when I use the word we throughout this presentation, I'm speaking on behalf of a collective of numerous partners and collaborators whose expertise and dedicated fieldwork have resulted in the knowledge that I'm able to share tonight. All right, so Mount Rainier has a really unique ecology. It has some of the deepest snowpacks in the world and unique geological history that shapes the whole biome. And for example, the Paradise parking lot this year recorded a depth of 19 feet of snow on the ground this February. Throughout this slideshow, I'm going to give some background info on the conservation status of 3 focal carnivore species and talk about the techniques that are used in the park to study them. So because these 3 species are either just returning to the park or have just recently been put in the conservation spotlight, we're lacking a lot of baseline information on how they live within the context of Mount Rainier. So we have questions like, where do these species occur? How many individuals make up these local populations? How successfully are they reproducing? And things like that. And we have quite a few different tools in our quiver that we can use to approach these questions, like remote camera monitoring, SCAT collection, tracking with very high frequency transmitters, and community science programs. When deciding which one of these tools to use, it's important to consider the health and safety of both the researchers and animals. So most of the carnivore research being done in the park uses the non-invasive tools. So I'll start with the Cascades red fox. This is a very special fox. It is only found in the Washington Cascades. It's a subspecies of Vulpes vulpes, which is just the red fox genus species. And it's been isolated from other mountain fox subspecies, like the Rocky Mountain red fox, which is found throughout the West in like in Colorado and Montana and Idaho and parts of Oregon. And the Sierra Nevada red fox is another rare mountain fox species, which is found in the Oregon Cascades and in the Sierras. And so the Cascade red fox has been geographically separated from these other fox populations for 15,000 years. And, but they've also been separated from other non-native fox populations in the West, like introduced European red foxes for somewhere between 300,000 and 600,000 years. And so with this long history of isolation, this subspecies of fox has become the most genetically unique red fox in the entire world. And it's right in our backyard. So mountain foxes evolved through the ice ages, and they have unique adaptations that outfit them really well for living in subalpine environments. And so that includes fur-lined paws and small body masses where they can walk across snowpack more easily without breaking in. Their range previously extended into southern BC, but now they're primarily found in the South Cascade Ecosystem, like from Mount Rainier to Mount Adams and in the surrounding national forest land. In the last 40 years, there have been fewer than 10 reports of red foxes in the North Cascades ecosystem, so north of I-90. The most recent of those reports have been a few photographs of individuals in the Alpine Lakes wilderness and a single scat collected in Stevens Pass ski area. So this tells us that there is some sort of population of Cascade red foxes persisting north of I-90, but we likely they're in a pretty serious conservation, they're a pretty serious small population. And there might be difficulty for in connectivity between these foxes that are north of I-90 and south of I-90, where a better stronghold persists. So unfortunately, it's been difficult for Cascade red foxes to get the conservation attention that they really need. And recent research suggests that there may only be around 20 reproductive female foxes throughout the South Cascades. And the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife is currently reviewing the status of the Cascade red fox to determine if it meets their criteria for state listing. So changing climate trends are projected to affect Cascade red foxes by altering their mountain ecosystems. These foxes are habitat specialists that live in upper montane forests and subalpine zones year-round, and it may be difficult for them to adapt to changes in their environments. So these changes could be shifts in weather patterns that affect the abundance of their prey species like meadow voles, Or it could be an increase in coyotes or bobcats, where they shift these less snow adapted species, shift their distributions to higher elevations and compete with red foxes more for limited prey resources. And so while carnivores like coyotes and bobcats have historically been excluded from high elevations in the winter, because they are poorly adapted to traveling in snow, things like more frequent rain events, that compact snowpack, and earlier spring snowmelt could make it easier for these lower elevation species to access fox habitat and compete with them. There are also concerns for the genetic health of these foxes. Subalpine ecosystems are naturally isolated from each other by valleys, but the connectivity throughout the fox's range is complicated by development and highways like Interstate 90 that fragment the landscape and make it difficult for populations to connect. So the consequence of small isolated populations is that they may become more vulnerable to diseases, and there's just an overall decrease in the health and fitness of their populations. Then another threat to Cascade red foxes, since foxes are omnivores and they're opportunists, they'll readily and repeatedly take advantage of human food and garbage. So habituation and food conditionings are concerns for the well-being of foxes in areas with a lot of human traffic. And the most visible Cascade red foxes are found in the Paradise and Sunrise parking lots of Mount Rainier and ski areas like Crystal Mountain and White Pass. And so these interactions with humans make them vulnerable to things like vehicle strikes, becoming aggressive, and having had to be like, if they become more aggressive, they may need to be put down. Their proximity to dog populations could be a pathway for disease transmission. And also this begging behavior could be passed down to like younger to kits and be passed down from generation to generation. And so in the bottom right photo, we have two foxes in the Paradise Mount Rainier area. And so this is a little fox kit that's sitting on the side of a road. The fox in the photo has repeatedly denned right next to the road in the Paradise area, and as a consequence has had a kit hit and killed by a vehicle. Also, there have been some anecdotal reports of foxes at ski areas who've been fed and then have eventually gotten run over by grooming equipment because they associate large machinery with food rewards. With foxes in such low numbers, these avoidable human-caused deaths can be pretty significant. National parks are usually are sometimes people's first exposure to natural habitats, and people may not recognize the damage that feeding wildlife causes. So advocating for kind, keep wildlife wild messaging is really important. So since the Cascade red fox is such a sparsely studied species in a unique and remote habitat, we're first trying to increase our baseline knowledge of them and focusing on things like their population size, their diet, and their exposure to diseases. And so we do this through collaborations with technical experts like the Cascades Carnivore Project. And the Cascades Carnivore Project, which is headed by Dr. Jocelyn Aikens, have been studying Cascade red foxes and Wolverines for over 10 years. And coordinates the fox and Wolverine monitoring projects in the park. And here are a few of their projects listed. So arguably the most important research tool we use to study rare carnivores in the park is SCAT. So SCAT is a goldmine of information for understanding a species or individual animal. It makes the ultimate non-invasive tool. Within the park, we have SCAT is being collected to be used to determine the minimum number of individuals of Cascade red foxes in the park and to understand their diet better. And so volunteers are playing a big role in this project. So I'm going to share a quick video about the community science program that's occurring in the park with Cascades Carnivore Project. All right, here we go.
So we're coming into subalpine parkland, which is a classic place that Cascade red foxes like to live. Oh, look at this. I think I found something. Is this maybe Cascade red fox scat? Tapered ends? I think it could be. We should collect it and send it to the lab.
I love when foxes leave a scat like that. They're using it to communicate, but also it just looks so staged. It's funny.
Okay, so let's pull out all our supplies for the scat collection kit. So we have our protocol. This explains step by step what you'll do in the field. We have sampling vials, parafilm to seal the samples, spare labels, 2 brown bags. We have gloves, small Ziploc bags, a large Ziploc bag, and you have a scale reference to photograph beside the scat. A smartphone with a GPS app and a camera, or you can use a GPS and make sure to bring spare batteries. A data form, you want to bring 2 pens and 2 Sharpies.
If someone doesn't have a smartphone that has GPS capabilities, Mount Rainier has some equipment that you can check out for the day for your survey.
Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to record the waypoint in your GPS app on your phone, and we'll label it with the field ID. Okay, Tara, do you want to record the information on the daily data form?
You bet.
So we'll start with a field ID that'll be the date. So just 20 for the year, 20 for the year, 06 for June, and 22 for the 22nd, followed by your initials, and then an S for scat, and 02 for the second scat that we collected today. And then you'll write our location, the latitude and longitude, and the elevation. And we want the latitude and the longitude in decimal degrees. And you can see on the protocol what that looks like. And I'll pull it up on my GPS app. And there should be a space there for whether the scat's fresh or dry. Okay, and then just finally, any kind of descriptive information on how the scat looks. Do we see any bone fragments in there? Is there a little small mammal skull? Are there hairs or are there berries? Do we have any sense of what the animal ate? Is it super fresh? That's when the DNA is really going to be well preserved. I'm going to take a photo of the scat with a scale reference in one of the containers showing the field ID and the other information in it. I take this before I sample the scat, so it's intact and you can see exactly what it looked like. Okay, so I'm labeling 2 vials with the field ID, and then the latitude and the longitude from our GPS app or from our GPS. Okay, and then we think it's fox, Cascade red fox, so VV is the code. And then this is the study area's Mount Rainier, MR for Mount Rainier National Park. For each scat, we're gonna collect 4 different samples. So we're gonna have 2 vials and we're gonna have 2 brown bags. So if you wanna put on your gloves, and this just protects yourself and it protects the sample from DNA contamination. Okay, so we'll start by collecting the 2 samples in the vials. So we just want a small amount of scats. So if you wanna start by removing the parafilm from the top. So you just want to collect 1 to 2 mils, just a very small amount from the sides or the end of the scat. That's where you're going to find most of the carnivore's DNA. And we'll put it in this vial that we have filled with ethanol that preserves the DNA. Okay, so then we're going to seal this lid with parafilm. Basically, it's a waxy film that just has a backing on it. You'll stretch the parafilm around the lid and it'll secure the lid. There you go. See, that's a perfect amount of stretch. You start going right around the top of the cap and then come down. You don't need to go too far. You really just want to focus on the edge of the cap. Twist over the edges at the end there. And now we'll take a second sample. Just like this one, just a little bit is all you need. It's amazing how much DNA is just in that tiny bit of scat. And now we're going to divide the remainder of the scat in 2, and we're just going to put each half in a brown bag. And then we'll put these 2 brown bag samples together. Now that we've collected the 4 samples from the 1 scat, you can go ahead and remove your gloves using a clean technique. Just pull from the bottom, bring your glove into the other one, and then pull from the bottom. And then you can just discard that in your backpack. Okay, so then our final step is just putting away the vials so they each go together in a Ziploc. We seal it up and we add the field ID label. This is just in case the ethanol leaks out. Put them in a big Ziploc that was in the sample collection kit.
Here's the data sheet.
Oh, thanks, Tara. We can put that in there with our samples. You want to pack up and we'll. Okay.
All plants and animals are part of our cultural heritage, and understanding wildlife is part of the original stated mission of the National Park Service. When Jocelyn started her nonprofit, it was a really logical collaboration to begin because we can't do all of the work that needs to be done. The Cascades Carnivore Project is soliciting volunteers to help us so that we can cover more area and get to more locations than we could by ourselves.
People care about having places to go that are wild. They care that our ecosystems are healthy. People care to know that there's wild animals out there, even if they might not see them.
You can contribute to this project in really meaningful ways. Don't need to have a PhD to follow the protocols. If you can follow directions, you are a scientist. You are actively helping to contribute to carnivore conservation. 1,500 samples have been contributed to the Cascade Carnivore Project. That was 1 scat at a time.
All right, so yeah, fantastic way to get involved with the carnivore monitoring at the park if you're local. I'll resume presenting. So when a scat is collected, we use morphological clues in the field to inform our guesses for which species left the scat. And you can see in this slide that some subtle differences between the scats. And so those morphological clues are like shape and size. And so I'll give you a second to look over these scat samples and try to have an idea of who left which scat. So for the first one, we have a Cascade red fox. And so this fox scat is small with tapered ends. Got Pacific martin scat, which is small. You can see the pencil. It's not too far off from the diameter of the pencil, and it's long and twisted. Then you've got porcupine scat, which was the wild card in there. And so the consistent diameter and the rounded ends are a giveaway that it's likely not a carnivore scat. So then you have Wolverine scat, which is larger and more like a twisted tube. And then coyote scat, which is long and rope-like. And then the last weasel species scat, the fisher, which is not quite as twisted as the martin scat, but still has that weasel-like twisted tube with the tapered ends. So now I'll talk about the fisher. Fishers are being reintroduced into the Cascades. They were removed from Washington in the 1900s due to overtrapping. So during the Depression, a family could feed their entire family for a year with the money from a single fisher pelt. And so this means that fishers were a pretty important species to the livelihood of some people. And so it was easy for them to be eradicated from the state. And so once trapping was eliminated, their habitat still remained, and that made them a great candidate for reintroduction in Washington. And so the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife determined that fishers would not likely establish on their own back in Washington, and that a reintroduction effort was necessary. And so between 2015 and 2020, 90 fishers from British Columbia and Alberta were translocated to Mount Rainier in the nearby Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, and 89 fishers were translocated to the North Cascades National Park and Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest. So Mount Rainier is monitoring the success of the fisher reintroduction. To learn more about the fishers' resource selection, where they establish home ranges, if they're successfully reproducing, what they're eating, and how they are dying. And so life is tough for carnivores that have to compete with each other and evade predation. These fishers are no exception to the trials of being a carnivore. And so these fishers that were reintroduced were outfitted with implant radio transmitters. And so those transmitters last from 18 months to 2 years after their release. And so the patterns of detection from telemetry flights that pick up these fisher locations, they pick up the signal that each individual fisher is transmitting. And they use those patterns of detection to determine the distribution of fishers, of the released animals around the state, and the home ranges of different individuals, and to find reproductive den sites. Den site monitoring is an important part of measuring the success of fisher reintroductions. The photo on the right is the first female in the South Cascades to be documented with offspring. And fishers move their young to a series of tree cavity den sites, and this female was moving her kit to a new den site. And you can see the kit's body just being taken down the tree in the female's mouth. And then the fisher on the left is a fisher we're currently tracking to see if she is reproducing this year. She was tracked to a rest tree where cameras were placed on the cavity that she was using. And this turned out not to be a den site, presumably because she left, she didn't come back very frequently, but we're still following her to see whether or not she's reproducing this year. These fishers have been set loose in a new habitat where they need to establish home ranges, find mates, and keep their offspring alive. They're carnivores, but they're also part of the food chain and do get predated by other carnivores like bobcats or cougars or wolves. The photo on the right is the skeleton of a fisher that was recovered in Mount Rainier National Park. It was one of the founding fishers that were released. And this animal was killed by another carnivore and is now at the Burke Museum. So fishers are also vulnerable to rodenticide poisoning from home-based products such as decon or forestry products used to control mountain beavers, which can cause economic damage to young Douglas fir stands because they really quickly colonize clear cuts and burrow and cause damage to those tree species. And so they are sometimes controlled with rodenticides to reduce that damage. And fishers may be consuming mountain beavers or other prey species that have been contaminated with different rodenticides. And so the exposure to these rodenticide products doesn't necessarily kill the fishers directly, but rather it reduces their overall fitness and health. Rodenticides related to illegal marijuana grows have had major impacts on carnivore populations in places like California and Oregon, but it doesn't appear to be as widespread of an issue in the forest land in Washington. But not much is known about the risk of exposure, the risks to fisher recovery from rodenticide poisoning. Some of the fisher mortalities that have been recovered in the Cascades have had some home-based rodenticides in their systems. And a focus of my graduate research at University of Washington is looking at those risks of rodenticide and what they mean for fisher recovery. And I'm doing that through SCAT collection. All right, so now we'll move on to the Wolverine. So the Wolverine is another, a relatively new returning member to the wildlife community around Mount Rainier. Wolverines have huge home ranges compared to their small size, and they typically weigh between 15 to 40 pounds, with males being larger. They're very active and can travel around their entire home ranges of hundreds of square miles every couple of weeks. And so this means that they're almost always found in low densities. Globally, Wolverines have a circumpolar distribution, which means they live at northern latitudes in snowy habitats that aren't very productive as far as food resources go. They're primarily scavengers, especially in the winter, but they also prey on small mammals and birds and ungulates sometimes as well. So since Wolverines they exploit these habitats that don't have a lot of food resources, they have to defend these large territories. So typically 1 to 3 female Wolverines occur within the home range of a single male territory. And these females will avoid each other and males will avoid each other as well. Wolverines were functionally extinct in Washington by the 1930s. Occasionally, a Wolverine from Canada would make a long distance dispersal and end up in the Cascades, but they weren't known to be establishing or reproducing in Washington until the 1990s, when researchers started noticing their presence in the North Cascades. And so this signaled that they were making a comeback in the state. But with really slow reproductive rates and connectivity issues, Wolverines are still in very low numbers in Washington. And Wolverines' reproductive success is heavily associated with deep snowpack that lasts into the spring. They need snow to insulate and protect their kits from other predators, and snow acts as a refrigerator to them. Because food availability fluctuates, they cache meat in snow holes or under boulders throughout the year, and these cool environments protect those food resources from flies and bugs that would otherwise eat and spoil the meat pretty quickly. And so Wolverines in the lower 48 are collectively threatened by habitat loss and connectivity loss. While Wolverines were known to have been slowly recolonizing in the North Cascades of Washington, there was little evidence on their presence in the South Cascades until recently. From 2006 to 2016, a lone male Wolverine was infrequently detected in the Mount Adams area, and he was thought to be the product of an extreme dispersal event because the distribution of Wolverines in Washington was believed to end in the North Cascades ecosystem. But in 2017, a female and a male were found sharing a territory right outside the park in the Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest. And so that pair reproduced in 2018, and the two kits and females are in this photo right here. And their den was very near the boundary of Mount Rainier. And so this prompted the park's collaboration with Cascades Carnivore Project to understand Wolverine presence here. So to understand Mount Rainier's role in Wolverine recovery in Washington, we want to see what parts of the park they're using, how many Wolverines there are in the park, and if they're successfully rearing kits here. As Wolverines are not yet considered established in the South Cascades ecosystem, we're really interested in learning if Wolverines can join this population at a sustainable rate. And so that would be through reproduction or through dispersal movement from the North Cascades population. So to do this, we are using remote cameras and genetic sampling. Remote cameras are an excellent way to gain information on species presence. And so with Cascades Carnivore Project, we're using integrated Wolverine monitoring stations to better understand the Wolverine population in Mount Rainier. So these stations incorporate a pole with upright braces for the Wolverine to climb on. And so they're encouraged to do that because of an overhanging bait item. And so this stance that we coax them into with these monitoring stations shows off their unique chest markings. You can see in this photo, these three individuals have pretty distinct and different chest markings. And also you can see best in the third photo, the photo on the right, you can see little clips and gun cleaning brushes that the Wolverines will walk through and brush up against. So hair samples can be collected. So this tool is a great non-invasive way to acquire demographic information on Wolverine populations. It reliably identifies individual Wolverines by their unique markings, while also giving information on their sex and reproductive status. In this slide, we have the 3 adult Wolverines that have been detected in Mount Rainier. And so on the left, we have Pepper, a female Wolverine nicknamed Pepper, and she was the one that reproduced in 2018, just past the park boundary. Unfortunately, she and her 2 kits have not been detected since 2018 and likely perished at some point. And so then there is Van, who is an adult male. He's in the middle photo. He was the father of Pepper's kits in 2018, as well as fathered Joni's kits in 2020. And so Joni on the right is the female who denned in the park last year in 2020. And she and her 2 kits were seen throughout the summer. And she is the first female to have denned in the park in over 100 years. So pretty exciting. So last summer, we knew that Joni had reproduced and had kits in the park somewhere because we could see her enlarged teats with these run pole monitoring stations, these integrated Wolverine monitoring stations. And so Wolverines give birth to kits in a snow den and stay with the kits in the den or nearby for about 2 weeks. And then they start making large back and forth trips to a system of food caches that they've made throughout the winter so they can keep nourishing themselves to nurse their kits. Usually sometime in May, the female will start moving the kits from their natal den where they're born to different maternal dens or just hiding spots for them as the kits get older and they get stronger and are able to move around with the mother more. So then once the kits start traveling with the mother throughout the summer, sometimes they'll even travel with the males as they get older. And as early as November, the kits can start dispersing to develop their own territories. Some Wolverines will travel thousands of kilometers before they establish a territory. We were able to document Joni with her kits several times on camera, and we collected genetic samples like hair and scat that will allow the kits to be identified in new locations where they show up. And so we have a couple videos to share of some Wolverine sightings. All right, so this was a Wolverine. This was Joni, sighted by the Cascades Carnivore Project crew in May, when her kits were still in the den. And so that female was traveling between, presumably between her den site and the camera monitoring site that the Cascades Carnivore crew was traveling, from trying to see if there were any tracks in this alpine environment that they could see. And then they came across a fresh set of tracks, and then shortly after were able to spot Joni. And that's pretty standard for how Wolverine sightings go, with a shaky camera through binoculars and like heavy breathing from excitement. And so here's another Wolverine. And so this video was taken by Travis Harris and shared with the park. And this is a photo of Joni and the two kits, which are becoming older and bigger. And so this is a pretty exciting video. Yeah, so for people who are less familiar with Wolverines, you don't usually get to see a lot of, there hasn't been a lot of Wolverines in Washington documented on camera. So the sightings that were around the park were very, very exciting. And it's really neat to see these rare animals moving around. And even though they're like large dog size, you can still tell by the way that they move that they're part of the weasel family. So here is the whole Wolverine family, mom, dad, and the kids visiting a run pole during the same week in October of 2020. So at this point, the kits were likely independent of their mother, but they were still likely spending time with either parent. So you can see the breeding male, Van, the breeding female, Joni, and then the two kits. And so through these photos, we were able to see that both kits were males, which was, while still exciting that there are two new Wolverine kits in the South Cascades, we were hoping for females. At the moment, the sex ratio of Wolverines in the South Cascades is pretty skewed towards males, with the breeding male from here, another adult male in the Mount Adams Goat Rocks area, and then these two kits. And those are the only known Wolverines in the South Cascades. Research suggests that while resident male and female Wolverines will defend their territories from other Wolverines of the same sex, breeding pairs will typically tolerate their subadult offspring living with them in the same territory until they're maybe 1 to 2 years old. So young Wolverines, which are born in February, they can disperse as early as November, the same year of their birth, but sometimes they'll stay within their parents' home range until they're sexually mature. And so that's between 1 to 2 years. Cascades Carnivore Project has a network of Wolverine monitoring stations throughout the South Cascades, all the way down to Mount Adams. And so really there's a camera station within each 15-kilometer grid of Wolverine habitat. So if one of these Wolverines were to disperse somewhere in the South Cascades, as a demographic study where most of these blocks of Wolverine habitat have some sort of monitoring component in them, theoretically we would be able to, Cascades Carnivore Project, and would be able to detect wherever these kits disperse to. But kits can disperse quite a long ways, and so likely they would not establish too close to the park unless they're the breeding male vacated the territory. So having identified the unique chest blazes and genetic profiles of each of the kits through sample collection of hairs and scat samples, we can monitor these where these Wolverines disperse to. The Cascades has a network of remote cameras operated by different organizations as well, like Conservation Northwest has Wolverine monitoring run polls, and the Cascades Wolverine Project, which is a great place to report any Wolverine sightings, because they have a big community science fielded research program where they have a website that it allows you to report your Wolverine sightings that all get to where they need to go. And so these Wolverines could be detected far afield from here in Washington. But since they can travel hundreds of miles from their natal grounds to during dispersal in search of an area to establish a territory, it is likely that we may not be able to determine the survival of the kits. And exploratory movements are inherently dangerous for all species. So, and there's not a lot of research. It's difficult to research dispersal mortality with animals, because non-invasively especially. But with that genetic information of from each of these kits, wherever they turn up, if they do turn up somewhere, it's huge that we've been able to collect that information on them so we can identify them and have a record of where they came from and where they ended up. And so it's very exciting to have Wolverines back in the park, and it's especially exciting that they were so visible this past year. Over 10 sightings were reported by park visitors, and 8 of those had verifiable photos or videos associated with them. The photo on the left is the resident female and one of the kits visiting a run pull together, and that was in October. The last time that either of the kits were detected on a camera was in December, and but we did just recently get word from Jocelyn when she went out to check she checked a camera station that had a visit from Joni, the breeding female, and you could see from her underbelly that she was not lactating, and so that's pretty typical for Wolverines to reproduce in a year and then take a year off, because rearing kits is pretty taxing, and she did a great job at successfully raising 2 kits to dispersal age. And then the photo on the right is a beautiful photo of Van, the breeding male, and so that's taken with a remote camera in an off-trail section of the park. And so that's my last slide. Thank you so much for having me to talk carnivores. The Cascades Carnivore Project manages the carnivore-related volunteer opportunities in the park. So I encourage you to check out their website if you're interested. Yeah, and we can open it up for questions now.
Hey, Kayla, that was really cool. I think Tara has been answering questions in the chat feed. So I think those are all taken care of. But yeah, I really appreciate you speaking with us today. And yeah, are there any other resources people should check out or visit if they want to get involved?
Yeah, so like I said, with with Wolverines and red foxes, the best resources would either be if you're visiting the park, we have this neat pickup drop-off system for people who are interested in becoming SCAT collection volunteers and who will be visiting the park a few times over the summer. We have like a COVID safe drop-off pickup SCAT collection kit system. And so it's easy to coordinate with Jocelyn, Cascades Carnivore .org to organize a pickup for a SCAT collection kit so that you're able to contribute to the non-invasive monitoring there. And also I encourage anyone who has seen any sign of Wolverine, like tracks or actual Wolverines, make sure you document the sighting, especially the tracks. And when you're taking photos of tracks, snow tracks, it's great to have something for scale in the photos. And so since Wolverines are just making their way back into Washington mountain habitats, researchers are very interested in new places where they might turn up.
Is there like a sheet online I can take to help me identify SCAT when I'm like out in the woods? Because I would have a hard time with that.
Yeah, and so with the carnivore, with the SCAT collection kits that we have at the park, you get a guide with like a protocol for how you collect the SCAT, everything that you need to write down, and there's a photographic guide with a few photos of each of the carnivore species SCATs to help you identify different ones in the field. But really with SCATs, it is a little difficult because the morphology is a bit all over the place, where there's definitely shapes and sizes of different species SCATs, which they're like mostly consistent, but there can be like wild cards for SCATs that like look like one species but end up being a totally different species. But it's an exciting skill to learn, to understand the different subtleties in the SCATs, and using habitat clues as well.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to learn more, and I will definitely be taking a kit when I visit the Mount Rainier Park this summer. So
Great.
thanks again for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having us.
All right, we'll talk to you later.